interaction between cognition, cognitive, behavioral, and environmental influences as well. Statistically, as much as 60% of participants who have gone on to perpetuate animal cruelty or child abuse report that as a child they witnessed or took part in animal cruelty, or they had self-experience with child abuse themselves and or domestic violence. Another thought is that there's this graduation hypothesis, that animal abuse graduates to more serious acts of violence against humans. There are also some variations to this hypothesis. One being proposes that the presence of animal cruelty in one stage of development, such as in childhood or adolescence, is strongly predictive of violence at a later date, such as in adulthood. The other thought is that this cruelty that children do to animals actually allows them to become desensitized to this kind of violence, and that they kind of learn to enjoy it, administering this pain and suffering, and then ultimately that fuels a desire to graduate to human violence. Cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead feels that animal cruelty could be a very good diagnostic sign that if we catch it early enough in children, they could actually, be helped instead of being permitted to go on to this long career of episodic violence or possibly murder. And a quote that from Margaret Mead that I like very much is, "One of the most dangerous things that can happen to a child is to kill or torture an animal and get away with it." In addition to that, there is some belief that animal cruelty is caused by something called the strain theory. This was brought about by a criminologist by the name of Robert Agnew. Basically, he said that animals interfere with our goals in some way, or they have these annoying behaviors, and then the abuser comes to believe that the abuse that they perpetuate against the animal is deserved. Well, I don't know. When I think about something that interferes with our goals in life and has annoying behaviors, I think about kids too. So, I mean, they do interfere in our lives in a lot of ways with goals that we might have had, and they have some of the most annoying behaviors. So if this strain theory is in fact true, we should be concerned about that. Basically, the animal becomes a scapegoat for the person when they believe that they've had these wrongs done to them. And the animal becomes a safe target. And I say safe because we are so accepting of animal cruelty for one reason or another that we fail to see the bigger picture, fail to prosecute people and hold them accountable. Even though we have this scientific evidence now that proves these things, the documentation that we should be mandating people to get help. Dr. Michael Fox says he's an animal welfare advocate. Some of you may be, he's quite an author too. He's written a lot of books and articles, but he's the director of the Institute for the Study of Animal Problems, which is basically the scientific arm of the Humane Society of the United States. He says that as long as we as a society don't allow or excuse any type of violence, we give perpetrators leeway to justify all types of violence. And lastly, I've always believed this, that people that are so cruel have some sort of different mechanisms in their brain. But I'm not a scientist, I can't prove it. But now there's basically research, studies, and evidence that support this. Jean Decity is an American-French neuroscientist. He's a professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Chicago. And he took inmates who scored very high on psychopathy testing and was able to show that when they visualized themselves having pain, being subjected to pain, they had normal responses to this pain perception in the brain centers that regulate emotion and empathy and morality. But when he asked them to imagine the scenario, pain being given to other people, then their results were not so normal. They did not show typical connectivity in areas that were important for these emotional regulations. In fact, some of the results indicated that the pleasure regions of the brain were more active instead. There was also similar testing done of this nature on groups of 16 to 18-year-old boys who were diagnosed with aggressive conduct disorder and a control group of similar age boys with no conduct disorders. And the results were the same. When viewing videos of intentionally inflicted pain to others, the aggressive disordered boys displayed extremely heightened activity in the reward centers of their brains. So I think that's kind of frightening. So what impact does animal cruelty have on society? Well, one, it desensitizes us. We get this loss of feeling. We're socialized to discount those feelings and submerge them. And we disregard them through something that's called emotional correctness, which is defined as the pressure that on an individual to be seen as feeling the same emotion as others around them or others that we associate with. There have been numerous studies done of very hardened, aggressive criminals and prison inmates who had extensive histories of severe cruelty to animals. And unfortunately, those acts were often excused or disregarded or minimized as things like, boys will be boys, or it's just an animal, okay? But acts of animal abuse that are perpetrated by children are some of the strongest and earliest indicators of conduct disorder. We know that now, okay? And children who harm animals are at a greater risk of becoming violent to others. We know that now. Criminal psychologists acknowledge that participating in or viewing acts of repeated cruelty to animals actually desensitizes both the perpetrator and the spectator. The social learning theory thing. So again, I'm going to quote Margaret Mead: "One of the most dangerous things that can happen to a child is to kill or torture an animal and get away with it." This is kind of what I imagine desensitization, like inhumanity. Eventually it leads to a lack of remorse for humans. Another impact that animal cruelty has on society is this loss of empathy. Empathy is the ability to relate to others who suffer. And without that empathy, it's difficult to have any moral imagination of the lives of others. Empathy is essential for healthy emotional development. I just thought everybody needs to find that kind of doctor. Another way that animal cruelty impacts on society is this habituation. Cruelty becomes familiar and breeds consent. And then what happens is this violent, abusive treatment becomes regarded as normal. And we see that being supported in all kinds, in a range of institutions, from corporations to agencies to institutions, peer groups, even our families. I wanted to share with you a 2010 study that was done to investigate the frequency with which Child Protective Service workers sought out information about animal cruelty during investigations of child abuse and neglect. It was done through an online survey, and few of the caseworkers routinely asked any questions. But those who did felt that the families were more willing to disclose the fact that there was animal cruelty in their homes, either by the children themselves or by the caregivers. And in fact, some of the caseworkers actually observed animals being cruelly treated in front of them. And almost all of them felt that animal cruelty was an important factor to consider when making intervention decisions. So why do they fail to ask questions then? Is it this form of denial that we talked about, or a form of emotional correctness? Are people just complacent, or or do they just not put a lot of value on the validity of this link? I would like to see, Betsy, on our intake screening forms, some way of working in this questioning of animal cruelty. I do ask this question routinely when I take intakes on the phone, and also when I spend time with the new people and teach them how to do intakes, I address that as well. Because the results routinely suggest that asking these questions and observing this behavior and just the living environment and how people and pets are living together, could be crucial information. Another way that animal cruelty impacts society is through denial. Dysfunction